Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. He's man, goddamn.
Hey, everybody, welcome into another episode of Rounding the Bases presented by Community America Credit Union. Believe in unbelievable. My name is Joel Goldberg. If you're listening to this as we release it, it's February already. We're already well into a month and beyond in 2023. Super excited about the conversation I'm about to have. It's just right in my wheelhouse. And so I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Quick shout out to my friends at Chief of Staff Kansas City, actually doing a big event with them later in February. Great partnership with them. Unbelievable recruiting firm locally, nationally. If you're interested, check them out at chiefofstaffkc.com. They're good people. They understand people. Chief of Staff Kansas City, making connections that matter. Speaking of connections, I'm a true believer that if you're out there networking and you're out there just looking to meet good people, that doesn't have to lead necessarily to business. It could lead to whatever it might be, resources, friendship, connections. You never know where it's going. But I know that early on in my speaking and podcast business, I met Courtney Thomas, and I think just one of the really good people and leaders here in this town. She's doing amazing things right now at Newhouse, and she's been a guest on the show before. She's one of those people that I just trust. The best thing about having a good network is when you trust your people and they know people, you know those are going to be good people. I hope that makes sense. And so I looked one day and she had posted on LinkedIn about my guest today. And I immediately texted her and I said, I need to meet this woman and have her on my podcast just based on what was written. And again, I trusted Courtney, so I didn't really need to vet any further than that. And so that's my way of one, thanking Courtney, and two, getting to the introduction. And today's guest has ignited an empathy revolution that is setting traditional leadership ablaze. Using a unique brand of problem solving that's enhanced by technical skill, she's helping leaders shine brighter than ever before. And it begins with being courageous enough to care. Her name is Dr. Nicole Price, the author, speaker, and CEO of Lively Paradox, where teamwork begins with celebrating differences. She'll make you laugh and she'll help you climb to the illuminating heights you are meant to reach. And so with that, I bring into the podcast Dr. Nicole Price. Nicole, how are you?
Hi, Joel. I'm doing well, thanks.
So excited. I already told you this in advance. I'm just totally geeking out because empathy is a topic that I talk about. And I truly believe that it's something that no matter what you do, is something that we all need to practice. We probably all could always be better at it. It's important. I almost wonder if it was always important or if it's become more important. I just know that right now in this day and age, we need to practice empathy. What's your thought?
My thought is that I believe most people think that's true when they are in need of empathy. We don't always practice it when it's time for us to display and demonstrate empathy towards other people. But the fact that we know we need it when it should be displayed towards us means that we have the capacity to get to it. So that keeps me excited.
So really, it's something that should always be important. Good times, bad times, no matter what it is, right?
To me, absolutely. And I was one of those people. I was one of those people who didn't necessarily think about empathy as a lead topic necessarily. I was reared in engineering and manufacturing environments. I worked with people who are called blue collar workers all day. And quite frankly, the nature of engineering work is if you're trying to get millions of parts out every day, you need to kind of treat people like cogs and wheels. And at least that's how you think of it. I can't stop the production line because you got sick today. I got to just put somebody else in your spot and they got to be ready to go. And that objective, reasonable, logical thinking can sometimes just train us not to be empathetic and compassionate.
I think that's really fascinating because, and I think that would apply not just to the engineers, but maybe more so the people that could be labeled as, like think about the coders, the people that don't necessarily want to be out there mingling. They're good. Go out there and network. Do your thing. I'm fine back here at my desk, in my cubicle, in my home, and I'm good at doing this, and I don't need the interaction. But yet we all do, I think. And so, when I speak to more of those blue collar workers, it's like, wait a minute, empathy does matter here too, right? I
Mm.
mean, I think that there's a little bit of I don't know if it's a double standard or how you would call it, but I think you're onto something. What you're talking about there is that oftentimes those people that are fine being off in the corner, they're fine. Maybe they're a little bit more introverted. That maybe we forget about them sometimes.
I'm going to use just a little bit harsher language. We dehumanize.
Mhm.
We believe since they are not interacting with us in the way that we desire, the way that we appreciate, the way that we think is normal, then what we do is other them and then see them as not as human as we are. And that's what's necessary for us to then separate ourselves, be more objective, more logical and reasonable in the way we deal with them, and less empathetic and compassionate.
So again, it's really something that we should be practicing with everyone all the time. I want to get more into this, and we'll dive deeper. But let's go into your background, because I'm pretty sure that if I had told you as you were starting to go through school that you were going to be doing this as an engineer, there's no way, right? I mean, this is a totally different. Well, like everything you just described right now, those engineers, that blue collar, I think you were, and now you're here. How did this happen?
Yeah, the journey is quite interesting. There's two ways to learn to be more empathetic. One is through a series of life experiences, which is how I found my way here to you today. But the science says that we can teach empathy. And I was probably one of those people who thought that either you had it or you didn't, that your Myers-Briggs personality type was logical and reasonable or empathetic and compassionate. And it just was what it was. But through a series of my mother dying, a divorce or two, and just some interesting life experiences, when you start to need to show up at work, but your mind is distracted by everything else you have going on, you start to realize and feel other people who have the same things. And you start to notice that all of us are living a very human experience, regardless of what our title is, regardless of what our role is, or even how much money we have. And on the other side of it, what I came to quickly understand is that I can't give you an experience. Or at least I shouldn't want to. I shouldn't want to give you cancer so that you understand that our healthcare system needs to be overhauled. You don't need to be homeless in order to understand that we need to figure out a different way to make sure everyone has a safe, warm place to live and is eating well. But as I started to study some of these things related to empathy, and I learned that, oh, simply reading fiction can help me become more empathetic to an issue, or going on what's called an empathy walk can build my capacity to care about certain issues. That listening to understand instead of listening for accuracy can actually help me be closer to a person. Once I found that out, I said, I'm going to be on my own little singular mission to share all the empathy tools that I can find so that we can create a more empathetic world. I believe we can do it.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there, which I'm excited. I'm excited to do. I- But I mean, I want to go back to you without digging too deep and too personal. But what were you like? I'll just label it as this: pre-empathy, post. Of course, you had empathy in you before, but I don't know how intentional you were with it. And I mean, I think we all have empathy to some extent. This is just my take, and I also think that it's something. A lot of it's muscle memory, but some of it you do have to work at every single day. It's important. What was Nicole pre-empathy or pre-discovery and post?
Yeah, so I think I can tell you one little story and it'll give you a good insight. So when um, did we have a did I stop for a little bit there? Do we need to
Well,
edit?
well, it was like a tiny little hiccup. So let me, and I'm just going to make a note for my editor right around 9:15. Oh, well, she'll catch it anyway. I'll just set you up again with that.
Okay.
What was Nicole like pre-empathy, or however you want to say it, and post discovery or change?
I think it can be tied up in one story. The last technical team I worked with, and I was the leader, they had a nickname for me, and it was a combination of my name, Nicole, and the Terminator, the cyborg that Arnold Schwarzenegger played in the movie The Terminator. They would call me the Nickinator. And the purpose of calling me the Nickinator was basically, listen, we've got cost that needs to be low, we've got quality that needs to be high, and we have service that needs to be impeccable. Period. Zero exception. No excuses, no reasons, no stories. There were times when I would show up and people would be afraid. And I thought that was wonderful, actually, because my team was always meeting their numbers. And I don't know that I was deliberately thinking about it or not. I just know that I would have never gone to a class about empathy unless I was forced. Um, that's just not something that I would have done. I would have sent somebody else. I would have said, get somebody else to do it.
I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I don't have time for that. That's not, I mean, what's this HR nonsense? I've got work to get out the door every day. Um, but on the other side of it, what I know is that for every data point, there's a person at the end of it, every one of them. And if we can just demonstrate that we feel people, that we hear them, that we support them, they'll meet their numbers. They will do everything possible to make sure that the quality is high. They will let you know when things are not quite right. They trust you enough to bring up the conflict, even though it's uncomfortable. Um, and I can't, it feels odd to try to convince people of it today because I don't believe that pre empathy, you could have convinced me of it. But right now, I'm just inviting people to practice a few things and just see what happens.
Whew, wow, what a change. And we get so caught up in those numbers, we forget about the human element, right? We get so locked in. This is true in business, sports, no matter what it is, right? Um, how hard of a leap is that to take for someone?
So I wish it were easy. There's a way to get there fast. And I think the fast way is the way that I learned, when um, my mother was killed by a drunken driver. So in the same way that anybody who's lost their parent has affairs to settle and funeral arrangements to make and a lifelong of memories to go through, we were also launched into a murder trial that dragged on for almost 5 years. And during that time, I remember that the grievance policy was 3 days.
Mm.
Of course, no one's ready to go back to work in 3 days, but I had 5 weeks vacation. So certainly I would have been better at the end of 5 weeks. But when I went back to work, what I did instead was repress and suppress what I really felt so that I could show up with the level of emotional intelligence and gravitas that I learned in all my emotional intelligence and leadership courses. But meanwhile, I wasn't able to focus. And I also felt like no one cared.
Mm.
And nothing like that personal experience to help me then think about how many times had I shown up in that way to other people? How many times had that my team was large enough that I was at a funeral, it felt like every other week. And each one of those people would have had 3 days grievance. And each one of those people would have had very aggressive objectives to meet and time to get back. And I know that people feel like, well, gosh, we can't give people this inordinate amount of time off. We got business to run.
Mhm.
But what I will tell you is that when somebody's at work and they're fit for work, the amount of innovation, the amount of creativity, the the focus on the details is just so high that it's almost intangible and hard for you to measure. Somebody needs to come up with a way to measure it like they measure engagement. But when someone's not suitable to work, how about we let them stay home until they are? And I don't think that's a novel idea. I think inherently we know that that makes a manufacturing facility safer. I think we know that that
Mhm.
makes a surgeon who's less likely to make errors.
I mean, this is all completely logical. We, no matter what we do, can get stuck in the past, tradition. This is the way it's always been. We as a society are slow to change, but this makes so much sense. So my question to you, I think, is this: that it, let's say you understand that now, you can coach people on that now, but let's say, for example, there's the 3-day grievance policy, and the boss isn't going to change that. Like, this is all well and good, but if the boss isn't changing it, if the higher ups aren't changing it, this is what you have. So how do you practice empathy in that situation? Let's say that you are someone's leader, you are someone's supervisor, and I can't give you more than 3 days. And I know that you're coming in, and I think we all know that repressing that and carrying it around with you is not going to make anybody better, specifically that person. How do you then push through if you can't quite get the changes you need?
And Joel, that's the experience of most leaders. Most leaders don't have the ability to change company policy. They have to just enforce whatever company policy they have in front of them. So it's a very astute question to ask. And so, what it would look like for me if I were in that position today is that for my morning stand up, which we used to do a morning stand up every day. And if leaders don't do that, I recommend it. It doesn't take very long. Everybody just standing there together. And the question is, what's on top for you today? What's the primary emotion you're coming into the space with today? Even if you wanted to ask, what are you celebrating today? Or, what is one thing you wish you could change today?
Mm,
Those are called social emotional check-ins. We do them in K through 12 education throughout the public school system throughout this country. As we get older, we forget that adults are just bigger children who do also need social emotional check-ins. And Joel, because people don't expect us to take their grief from them. That was never my expectation.
mhm,
But it would have been nice if once someone would have said, "How are you feeling today?"
mm.
And just listened and held a little space for me. Because maybe that's all I needed to be able to show up and do my work and compartment. Maybe I want to compartmentalize it. But if we just act like this thing didn't exist, I didn't have this major life event, and we're just gonna go on as if everything is the same way it was last Wednesday. It's a denial of basic humanity that when people lose a parent, that there's a grieving process. And to act like nothing changed is a lack of humanity, actually.
Oh man, we all are carrying stuff.
All of us.
Here's the thing: we always were.
We
Like, to me, look, and I'm not different than anybody else. I think and there's a time and place. I don't think anyone is saying, air everything out all day long. No one's saying, like, go into the office and lay on the couch and share 3 hours. Like, no
right.
one's asking to do that. No one's asking to receive it. But I think we all need that safe space. Like, in my world, I'm going to carry some stuff with me that might be going on behind the scenes, because no one is tuning in to a television broadcast about a baseball game to hear what's going on wrong in my world. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't care. That doesn't mean that there aren't little bits and pieces I could share if something public happened and I want, you know what I mean? But um, at the same time, I can't carry that around all day long at the stadium and keep it in. And so I think, and I'm curious your take on this. Like, I think what you said was profound. I just needed someone to ask, right? You needed someone. I don't even want to call the shoulder to cry on, so to speak. But a safe space, a place where you could just say, you know what, I'm not doing great today, and to have a little bit of that support. How do you find that, and how do you offer it? And I'm not necessarily saying, superior, boss, employee, whoever it is, colleague. How do you find that safe space? How do you offer that safe space?
Yeah, I used to think Gallup asking the question, "Do you have a best friend at work?" was a ridiculous question.
Mm,
Because I'm like, if I don't have a best friend at work, what are you gonna do? You're gonna give me one? Um, and what difference does it make to you? And I also thought I don't have a best friend at work. My best friend is my college friend or my college buddy or whatever. That was until one day I walked into a manufacturing facility and my best friend at work wasn't there anymore. Now, I didn't
mm,
call him that, but he was my person. He was my person that we talked about everything. Just no holds barred, no we all put on a little bit of a mask when we're at work, or at least most people do. But this guy, we could have real authentic conversations about what was working, what wasn't working, what needed to be done differently. And one day he wasn't there anymore. And I remember that gap that was left because I didn't have a person. And I don't know that we can force relationships, but what I do know is that leaders have the ability to create a work climate whereby people feel like they're part of a work team. I don't need to feel like you're my family. But are you doing anything as a leader to make sure we all have a shared mission? Mission is part of the work that you're doing. Are we all driving towards that shared mission? Have you done anything at all to just coalesce the team around a ridiculously hairy idea? And if our work is not all aligned, can we do a volunteer activity together at least once a year or something to help build that concept of team that I think sometimes we think is just going to happen on its own without any effort from us? And we have to put some effort into the work culture that we want to have inside our organizations. That's what I'm saying. I'm never going to suggest that we're going to be at work holding hands and singing kumbaya and treating our coworkers like our therapists. I think that's a lack of actual personal boundaries.
mhm.
But assuming that people are working on their own personal healing with their own therapists, I think each leader should ask themselves, what am I doing to make sure that the culture around the people I work with is one where I honor the inherent dignity in every single person who walks through the door, and I am spending time to try to understand them and their lived experiences. That's what I'm advocating for.
I mean, it's profound, and we and I'm gonna ask you to go here. We live in a world of numbers oftentimes, or
Mhm.
regularly, right? I mean, we're measured by in sports wins and losses, our statistics, the sales sheets, on and on. Um, One of the sets of numbers, and it comes from a book called The Trust Factor
Mm.
um, by Paul Zak, who I've never met, but I'd like to get him on the show too. And his research showed that high trust work environments, 74% less stress, 106% more energy, 50% higher productivity, 76% more engagement. That comes from trust. I told you before we came on that I believe in my non academic brain. And yes, I do have my undergrad from the University of Wisconsin, but it's been many, 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 many years since I was in a classroom environment. You put in all that work, you've got that doctor in front of your name. Um, I will never be a doctor, but I do have good or bad handwriting. That's the closest I'll ever come to being a medical doctor. But um, I told you beforehand that I think trust and empathy are linked. I think that you become more empathetic and build empathy by first building trust. But I also think that when you show empathy, you can build the trust. What does empathy do in terms of numbers to productivity?
Yeah, so I didn't bring a bunch of numbers with me
You don't
today.
have to bring them, but
I will.
well, let me interrupt because my amazing assistant and producer did a little bit of research um, on some. She wrote them down as empathy stats 2015. The top 10 companies in the global empathy index increased value twice as much as the bottom 10, and also generated 50% more in earnings. This was all came from research that she was doing regarding you and maybe some of your research. Correlation as high as 80% between departments with high empathy and high performance. 87% of CEOs believe empathy is tied to workplace performance. So I just want to throw that out there to say that, like you just said, this isn't just kumbaya type of stuff. There are actual benefits to
Yeah.
productivity, which is completely against what you used to think.
Completely against it. In fact, I remember the first time that someone told me to try to do an SEL. It was an educator, and he said, "At the beginning of all your meetings, I want you to just do a check-in with people." And there's a guy named Michael Tennant, and Michael Tennant owns an organization called Actually Curious. And he has these cards that are designed for you to ask other people so that you can build empathy. So if you don't want to come up with your own social emotional check-in questions, you don't even have to anymore. I mean,
Mm,
Michael and his organization has made it easy. But I remember the first few times I did it, it took about 10 minutes or so, and I got an hour-long meeting. So I'm thinking, you just used up uh, way more time of my meeting than I wanted to. What if we start cutting these SELs, these social emotional check-ins? But whatever meeting he was on, he would insist that we still do them. Today, I'm the one who insists that we do the SEL
mm,
because a social emotional check-in, when it helps to build my empathy, it helps me understand people. So
mm,
yesterday, the question of the day was, what's something in the first 30 days that you have decided to prune out of your life?
mm,
People said things like TV, friendships that are not serving me, saying yes, I don't have great all the time because I don't have great boundaries, a plethora of things. And it could just seem like it's a little fun thing to do at the beginning of a meeting. But what it does for me as a leader is it gives me insight into who my people are. These are people who would normally not share because they're very private, and they give me insight into like what they're dealing with. And armed with that information, I can make better decisions. I can help make sure that conflict is the healthy kind. I can ensure that I can get more buy-in for my change management initiatives. And when necessary, it helps me to be able to coalesce people based on what strengths and weaknesses are. And that information is invaluable. And so now I'm like, spend 15 minutes on the SEL if you want. We will get to the numbers because I don't know. Here's what I'll tell people: I don't know how to convince you of it. All I know how to do is ask you to do the practices to see what happens. And if it doesn't work, go back to doing what you were doing before.
try it.
Just try it.
It's interesting. Like sometimes people will call something like that icebreakers, which I guess ultimately it is.
It is.
I and sometimes they're cutesy, they're funny. What was your favorite? Blah blah blah. But one of the things I do more keynotes than workshops, but sometimes, like recently, I did a presentation for a leadership team. Manufacturing world, 10 people in there, C-suite and all leadership, and I just asked the question, two questions to go around the room. What did you dream of wanting to be when you grew up, and what do you dream of now? Because those dreams change. Like when you're a kid, you're not dreaming of I want to provide for my family or I want to retire. And then you get later in life, and all these things have happened to you, right? Life has happened, and your perspective changes. And it was just fascinating to listen. The what did you want to dream? What did you want to be when you grew up? Was a lot of the fun stuff. I want to be a baseball player. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a whatever. And and then the way it changed, it got a little bit emotional.
Yeah.
It might have involved taking care of somebody. There was one, and I'm not mentioning names of the company, and uh, but there was one gentleman that started to speak, and he just couldn't. I could see it. I hadn't built the trust and relationship with these people yet, but I know that I'll never set someone out to be uncomfortable. I think that's another way, but to me, of building trust and being empathetic is trying to put people at ease, trying to make people comfortable and giving them a safe space. And so I could see right away that this guy, whatever was on his mind in terms of dreams, was about to trigger, a fountain of emotions, and he was going to be really uncomfortable. And we don't have to go there. And I did go back to him and say, I just want to make sure. He's like, no, I'm good. Uh, but it's amazing what happens when you could just throw a simple question out there,
Yeah.
what that can bring out of people. I like it. in some ways, it's kind of shocking to me, and it reveals the power of just, I don't know, these conversations that we don't maybe have enough of.
I completely misunderstood most things in the emotional intelligence classes I attended. It seemed for me like it was more about appearing like you were emotionally intelligent, behaving in a way that exuded gravitas and executive presence. But what you just described is giving people permission to feel. And there's only two ways to handle feelings: express them or repress them. And when we repress or suppress, either because we feel like that's what we have to do in order to maintain our position and status in life, or because of social pressure, it's going to come out either through stress in our bodies in terms of hypertension, diabetes, all of these ailments that we tend to have here in the States, or our hair loss or weight gain, all these things that show up as challenges in the body. And so doing simple mindfulness exercises, somatic therapy practices help us showing up in the world where we're more attentive, which is another one of your words. And through that attentiveness, you can't help but be more empathetic. You see, when you walk past a person who is without a home on the street as if they're not even there, that over time creates a kind of psychic numbing that I'm just indifferent to the challenges of the world. And the more we become accustomed to that, the less humane we are. And how do you build a good team? Why even bother doing engagement surveys if we don't want to engage in the basics of humanity, which is at least look another person in the eye and recognize their inherent dignity? You don't have to give them money if you don't want to. And if you do have to give the money, you don't have to do so begrudgingly. But it is a different way to recognize that I am you, you are me. We have some of the same shared experiences in the world. And if we know that, okay, yes, now we can get the 50 million widgets out on time.
I mean, shoot, all of our minds go there, right? I mean, especially with where we're at post COVID, if we're post and economy, and there's there aren't too many street corners and intersections you drive by without someone out there. I mean, I was thinking about that today as you and I are recording this today, not too far before the release date. It's a really cold day, and there are people out there bundled up, holding signs and all that. My mind goes to why, what's going on, what's the deal, and then there is. You tell me, if you're listening, how many times that you've turned your eyes away. I'm guilty of it. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that now as you talk about it.
Mhm. Well, one of the things I do is out myself. When I in the book Spark the Heart, I tell a story about one of my friends who, when she had her baby, she had postpartum depression. And then when she had her second baby, that postpartum depression turned into paranoid schizophrenia and just snowball of effects. And then she ended up being homeless and on the street. And one day I saw her on a corner and I was embarrassed. So I averted my eyes and did not stop to
Mm.
talk to her. And this is one of my friends. Um, and I got an opportunity to do one of those hold hands singing kumbaya kind of retreats out in Ojai, California. But one of the exercises is that you get dropped off in Santa Monica, and you without any money and no wallet, and the rules are you can't speak, like no talking. Well, if you can't speak, it's not like you're gonna go hang out in a coffee shop or, go to a restaurant or go shopping. So I found myself just kinda hanging out on the beach with people who didn't have homes. And what was interesting was as soon as they realized that I couldn't talk, they assumed I was mute, which is fine. But in that assumption, they asked me if I were hungry. So now I get food, got an apple. I wouldn't get an apple otherwise. I can't ask for it. I'm paying attention and listening. When you can't talk, you can do nothing but listen. So I'm listening to the stories that people tell, hearing these stories to help me see that everyone who's homeless has not lost their mind. and then been homeless, like my friend Andrea. Many of them have lost their minds because they're homeless. There's something dangerous about living outside that might, cause you to lose your mind. But in there, there'd be these sparks of genius. And I tell people I found myself on the beach in California, like with people who had loved and lost, with people who had lost their parents and had hopes and dreams. And because they didn't have family, here they are. And so now when I see someone without a home or someone with a sign, it is not reasonable for me to give money to everyone. I don't think that my budget could take that. But what is reasonable is that I can look someone in the eye and say hello, acknowledge that they're there. You know, nobody has to do this thing that I'm doing, but I have a certain number of dollars in my car, and I give them out. And when I'm out, I'm out. Um,
Wow.
so nobody has to do those things. But what does it cost you to not be rude? Because if you just sit and observe, most of the time they don't just avert their eyes, they're actually rude. So imagine, if you will, being without a home. And in our case, it's 11 degrees outside. You don't have anywhere to go. And people are saying, oh, they're hiring everywhere. They're hiring at KFC. Well, if you ever look at the we're hiring signs at KFC, there's a little QR code that you have to be able to scan with your phone. Any phone that requires a scan is going to be $1,000. So
Yeah.
you tell me how the homeless person is going to scan the QR code to get the job at the KFC. And let's say they do still have a phone and they have a place to charge it. What did they put on in terms of an address? How do they shower for their first day at work? How do they get the shoes that they need that have the no slip soles? There are a lot of things that cause it. And sometimes we won't do the work to just say, instead of what's wrong with this person, what happened to him?
Mm. Yeah. And dignity doesn't cost anything.
Not a thing.
I just wonder how many. I'm going to try this today. I mean, I wonder. I'm guilty, like most, I think, of looking away because it's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. And I did it with my friend.
Yeah. I mean, there's a guy that I see all the time at one intersection. He's holding a sign and he's just always smiling and giving a thumbs up. So I might kind of like, wow, it took him making me feel comfortable. Like, why not just wave or ask how they're doing? That may not be the end all be all, but it's got to feel good to receive that too. So,
The number one complaint I heard that day is that nobody will look at you.
oh,
Somebody looking you at your eye and just responding to you is just not a thing.
one follow up before my baseball themed questions. And I should tell everybody I was going to, and you just went there. The book is called Spark the Heart: Engineering Empathy in Your Organization. Um, when you were done with that exercise at that retreat in Santa Monica, once you were able to talk, were you able to go back and talk to some of those people?
No, so I didn't go back to the beach, but what I did do is go to the organizer of the retreat, and I told her I confessed what had happened with my friend Andrea, and I was incredibly emotional, and because I was feeling convicted after me being on the beach and having my experience, and she said to me, "You're going to get another chance." And it sounds kind of woo woo. I remember it was one of those conferences, and you're not gonna believe this, but this is true, and nothing like a witness to keep you honest. That's, Denver Moore. Um, but I was still driving my son to get his haircuts because he wasn't driving just yet, and it was a really rainy day, the first weekend after I got back, and I missed the exit, and I've been driving my son to get his haircut by this point for 10 years, and I missed the exit. So I get off, and I get back on, and there standing there is a homeless woman, and I notice her, like I'm getting ready to say hello to her, and she says my name. and I make this face just like you did, and then I look closer. It's my friend, Andrea.
Andrea. Wow.
And so my son, he knows this whole story because I told him about what happened on the beach. He's like, "Oh my God, mom." So I ask her to get in the car. She gets in the car, but remember, she suffers from paranoid schizophrenia. So I ask her where she wants to go. She tells me. But then as soon as we're getting ready to pull off, she's like, I really don't want to go. I was just hoping that I could get some money. So I had my son like give her some give her some money. Like I got an opportunity to redeem myself.
Mm.
I feel so. He gave her some money. She got out of the car. I haven't seen her again since.
Wow.
But I call those kind of universe experiences. I happen to be Christian, so actually call them God experiences. And I can't give those to people, but you don't have to learn that way. That's a
Yeah.
quick way, but you don't have to learn that way. You can practice listening. You can read fiction. You can go on empathy walks. If you have a position about, let's say, immigration, why don't you spend some time with some people who are dreamers, um, who have known no other country but this one? Spend some time with them and then tell me that they should be sent back to some place they've never lived.
Yeah.
That's really hard to do if you get close because you can't help but build your empathy muscle.
Mm. I I wanted to ask you this and then I forgot and now you just reminded me, which is good. My description of empathy. I didn't read this anywhere. I don't know whether it's right or not. It's just my description to audiences. It's very simple. It's just scratching the surface. Empathy to me is walking in someone else's shoes. That's it.
Mm.
Yes, no, pick that apart because I'd like to be able to learn from it.
I think it's important for us to talk about empathy in a simple way like that because so often people think empathy means that I don't hold you accountable. People think empathy means I'm being soft. Empathy means that I have to share your values. No, empathy means that no matter what you think, feel, or believe, I'm going to try to understand that if I had the same experiences as you, if I believe what you believe, if I think what you think, I'll do what you do. It is what you're saying to the way Harper Lee describes it is to step into somebody's skin and for a little bit and walk around in it.
Yeah.
And there are people who, they talk somatic empathy and cognitive empathy and effective empathy and radical empathy and compassionate empathy, and they want you to break it all down. And while I believe all of that's important, and while I understand all of it even, the empathy revolution I am trying to spark in the nation is as simple as how you just described it. What would it be like if we just took a moment to say, what would I want to happen if it were me walking around in those shoes?
Mm.
And if it's 11 degrees outside and cold and you're outside, there have to be a series of things that didn't go well for that to happen. And you would not want someone to say to you, "Get a job." That's the last thing you need to hear in that moment.
Wow. It's a lot. There's just a lot. It's a lot to process in a good way. I hope that everybody that is listening just can take something a lot from this. I am. And I knew this was going to be the case going in based on the topic and everything I said before, that I knew this would go a little bit long. There are no rules. I can go as long as I want, but I know our attention spans nowadays. We're all over the place. And so but I knew we'd go a little bit long and I still need to get to my baseball theme questions and I could go on and on and on, but let's do that for you in this long, winding, incredible journey that you've had professionally. What's the biggest home run that you've hit?
My biggest home run was taking this huge risk to shift from doing what I know so much about, which is leadership development, and mostly with technical professionals around making inclusive teams, and spending all the liquid cash I have because I believe that Kansas City, as the heart of the nation, can spark empathy throughout the rest of the country. And I think it's going to work. It feels like it feels right. It doesn't matter who I talk to about it. The answer's been yes. And I think it's been the biggest home run I've had.
That's a grand slam as far as I'm concerned. It's a heck of a home run because it changes people, it changes lives. How about a swing and a miss? We all have those. A swing and a miss, and what did you learn from it?
The swing and the miss was spending far too much money on virtual training.
Mm,
Even at the height of the pandemic, people like synchronous. They want to be on with you live. I have not been able to figure out that whole asynchronous, get on whatever you want to and just kind of talk to the screen and answer the questions. That's been a dud for me. And if somebody has a solution, I still have that virtual platform out there sucking up money.
it's still there.
It is
All right.
still there.
And then,
It's giving me anxiety in my chest as I speak about it.
well, let's move on then. We can't dwell on the misses. You got to get ready to hit again. So, the last one is small ball. I mean, I think empathy is small ball. It's why I talk about it in my presentations. It's why it's a part of just about everything I do in terms of building successful teams and cultures. What is small ball? What are the little things that add up to the big results for you?
Some people get upset when people want to pick their brains, but I actually love it when people come to me to ask me questions about
Mm,
empathy. And so whenever someone has a question about it, whether it's in my social media DM, whether it's an email that I receive, or even when it's a proposal call and I think it's a sales call. If someone has an empathy related question or a people related question, I'm going to answer it. I'm going to solve. If it's a technical fix we can solve right then, I'm going to help you solve it right then on the call, no cost. And I think that has been really helpful to me. It's a really, I'm going to be on the call with you anyway.
mhm.
So I might as well be helpful. And I like doing that. It's a small thing I do, and I think it's helpful helping in the world.
I love it. I haven't heard that answer before, so very, very cool. As I wrap things up, and sometimes I didn't tell you this in advance. Sometimes I'll do four final questions. We might even throw those on YouTube. I think I'm just going to throw the whole interview on YouTube because there's just so much here. And one of the one of the sometimes they're lighthearted, sometimes they're not. I figure four questions around the bases, and one of them was going to be about the nickname, the Nickinator, but you already covered that one, so I don't need to go there. I think what I want to do is end it with this. You talked, and I heard you in another podcast referring to it as well about the empathy walks.
Mm.
Tell me, I mean, I am of the belief that just getting outside, maybe not on a day like today, or bundle up, that's fine, uh, but just getting out there, the fresh air, the moving, whether it's I mean, I love hiking. I'm not like a major crazy advanced hiker. I'm not climbing off mountains or crazy things like that, but I love moving. I love getting out there and doing that. Tell me about the empathy walks and what those mean to you, what those do.
Yeah, so I got the concept from what's called the Gemba walk. I'm an engineer, and so the Gemba walk, it means to just go and see the real place, and it's got a whole lot of other technical components to it. And so I transitioned it to the empathy walk when I started focusing on empathy more effectively. So you've seen the show Undercover Boss,
Mhm.
where you like go in and you do the work of the people who are doing the work. And so you can see how it needs to be better and how some of your leadership decisions are not working. That's an example of an empathy walk. Another example could be, let's say you have an employee who's late to work every day. Why don't you try to get to work in the same way they get to work and see what happens? I found out one time I had an employee who was driving 2.5 hours round trip every day to and from work. Now,
Mhm.
when you consider that in the Midwest, well, sometimes you're going to be late. It helps me as a leader make some different decisions around maybe I shouldn't treat everybody equally. Like if you got to walk 5 minutes versus this other guy who's driving an hour and a half, then, maybe you're going to be late sometimes. If you run a food bank and the people have to get there to your facility by bus, ride the bus. It's called an empathy walk. Get on the bus, see what the experience is like, and see what changes you need to make throughout your entire supply chain, not just in your four walls. For schools, we recommend that everyone on staff at the beginning of every year goes to visit every single child's home. They don't have to go inside, but it gives you some sense for if somebody's living out of their car, what other kind of support services they might need to be able to learn in a way that's fruitful.
Very
Empathy.
yeah, um, incredibly profound and powerful, important practices of empathy. Um, I mentioned Nicole's book, so certainly I encourage everyone to check that out. That's something that I am looking forward to doing myself. The book again, Spark the Heart: Engineering Empathy in Your Organization. I highly recommend that you check out her company's website as well, Lively Paradox. Real simple, livelyparadox.com. We will have the website and all that information in our show notes. Engineering Olympic level leadership performance, and this isn't just empathy; it's diversity, equity, inclusion. I would make the argument, it's not even an argument, it's obvious, I think it should be, that empathy goes hand in hand with inclusion. It is all tied together. Nicole, as I hoped, as I expected, a robust and amazing conversation. I'm so grateful to Courtney for introducing us, for you and your time and the work that you are doing in making the world a more empathetic place. Thank you so much for coming on Rounding the Bases.
I appreciate you for having me. Thanks, Joel.